Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game. So, tearing out a fun and exciting episode for you guys this Friday because we're going to be building and going over the brand new Itx-Llama. If you're wondering what that is, it's basically a DOS Windows 95 and Windows 98 era PC made out of modern components that match what would have been done back in the day. This is not FPGA, it is not emulation, it is real hardware running the instruction set from a Pentium MMX class CPU, basically making a brand new PC in 2025 that is the class of hardware you would have been playing Windows 98 and DOS games back in the day on, and that is absolutely outstanding because if you're familiar with Windows 98 games or DOS games, they can be an absolute metric pain in the ass to run on a modern platform. DOSBox is incredible, but especially for a lot of the Windows 98 games, it is very hit or miss if you're actually going to get them to run on a modern PC or not. This is a small ITX form factor board, and it does a metric crap ton of stuff for being so small, and it's all down to that system on module or SOM in the middle of the board right there. Now this is basically a fan project. There are pre-order batches that are going to be going up. It is not widespread distributed at this point in time, and luckily the maker sent me a demo copy so I could take a look at it on the channel, explain to you what it does, and see if you might be interested in one of the group buys in the future. You'll see here this SOM on the center of the board. That's basically hosting both the CPU as well as the RAM. And when it comes to CPU instruction sets, it's basically a set of instructions that the CPU can handle, and this has the same instruction set as something like a Pentium class processor that would run on Windows 98. Additionally, there's other modules you can install on the board if you would like the OPL module for sound here, or even a Raspberry Pi that's going to be able to do low-level MIDI emulation. If you remember back in the day, if you're one of the cool rich kids, which I was not, you could have MIDI on your DOS or Windows PC, where most people didn't have that. I love the fact that this board gives you all the capabilities to build it the way you want. If you just want basic Sound Blaster support, you can do that. If you want the OPL module and MIDI support, you can do that as well. And it's all in pursuit of a very easy way to play DOS and Windows 98 games. And you'll have to excuse the monitor here. I cannot force it to 4x3. I was going to take one of my CRT VGA monitors out, but I hate how it flickers on camera, so you're going to watch DOS footage in the wrong aspect ratio, but again, that's because I am just testing it at this point in time. If you want to see a full setup guide, leave me a comment down below. Now around the back you have all of the audio you could possibly want. You have your audio as well as optical audio, game port, USB ports, the PS2 ports, as well as Ethernet and some more USB. And the best part is you don't need to use PS2 components, keyboard and mouse to be able to control this like you would have to back in the day. There are chips on the motherboard that will allow you to plug in USB keyboards and mice, and that'll basically just translate it over to the PS2 format for stuff like DOS and Windows, so it makes a huge difference. It's basically a modern recreation of an old computer with all the quality of life improvements you would expect out of 2025, like being able to bring a gaming mouse and keyboard to the mix to be able to play. And you'll see at the bottom of the Itx-Llama board as well, there is this slot, and if you're not as old as I am, and I'm not even that old, you might not recognize it, but this is actually an AGP slot. We have PCI now, but AGP was basically the standard for graphics cards back in the day when they were known as 3D accelerators and not GPUs. And for at least this test build, I've decided to use a card from Nvidia, but this is where I need your help. I do not have an ITX case for this build, and I have not selected the final graphics card I'm going to use on it either, so give me your recommendations down below. It's been a long time. This is an Nvidia TNT 2, and I bought this because it was all of $20 on eBay. I actually didn't have any AGP graphics cards in my closet of doom, and when I was back for Christmas at my father-in-law's house, I couldn't find anything that was old enough that would work with the Llama. And you'll see here, it just slots directly into that AGP slot like any other card would. So go ahead and recommend me a card down below, and remember, back in the day you were able to install cards pretty much any way you wanted, including incorrectly, so make sure you get this right. It's definitely a measure twice, cut once sort of scenario. Pun very much intended, because I put this on a cutting board just so I wouldn't scratch up the table with the solder joints on the bottom of the board, just for physical fit, and I do have to lift it up a little bit before I pop that AGP card in. But it's so much fun to build this, even if it is just temporary on my desk, because it reminds me of building PCs back in the day. Now as far as the power supply is concerned, it is just ATX, and you do not need a 600 watt or 450 watt power supply to be able to do this. It's just what I had hanging out, so I threw the smallest power supply on, the 450 watt, which is like bringing an absolute battleship to a knife fight. So definitely I'll probably go Pico ATX power supply in the future when I actually finish up this build in a more permanent process. But again, recommend me what you think down below. And you will see here there is a micro SD card slot, which is recommended for DOS, but if you want to do Windows 98 98, they recommend a SATA hard drive, and you'll see here this is 256 gigabytes, which is absolutely way too big of a card that you would ever need for DOS, but this is a very what was in the top of my parts drawer build right now, just to get it up and running, testing it, and then decide exactly how I want to build it in the future. So with everything rigged up, the graphics card in, the power supply, the micro SD card, and a monitor here, we just go ahead and power it on, and it really just looks like booting a computer from back in the day when you were in the DOS era. And I just still remember using Windows 3.1 and then moving over to Windows 95 and 98. From there, I think I skipped XP and went over to the Mac ecosystem for a long time through the G3, 4, and 5 until I finally went back to Windows after the G5 era. And just like any other PC, you're going to be able to get into the BIOS settings and change and configure whatever you want. There are multiple frequencies the CPU can work at. By default, it is 300 megahertz, and you can lift that all the way up to 500 megahertz, which I would recommend if you get into Windows 98. For the most part, this is going to run every single DOS game you could possibly throw at it perfectly, but there are a few games out there that can be sensitive to CPU speed, so you might actually have to dial it back if you find any games running too fast, not just giving you extra frames, but feeling like they're in fast forward. And it's a good thing I remember my DOS prompts from back in the day as well, to be able to get that micro SD card formatted and then have the DOS files written back over to it, so it can be a bootable disk that we can basically just treat as a hard drive, even though it is a micro SD card. But again, do not bring a 256 gigabyte card to the party here. Not only is that way too big for actually using for DOS, even if I filled up every single DOS game ever known to exist, I'd probably still have half a card free. But the other situation is once you actually delete the non-DOS partition off the micro SD card and partition it again, depending on the size of it, it's going to take some time to actually partition everything and then verify that partition on a 256 gigabyte card. Trust me, I was able to go and eat some lunch and come back, and it was basically done from there. And that's not the Itx-Llama's fault, that it's just the fact that DOS never got cards this big back in the day. Even if you're at a research institution, I don't even think 256 gigabyte drives were a glimmer in somebody's eye at that point in time. But once you've actually partitioned the disk and gotten everything ready, you can basically copy over some of the files, and you can go ahead and format that disk as a C drive so that it is bootable and you can run it once you restart the computer. And if you're not familiar with DOS, trust me, all of these prompts can easily be found online. There's still a ton of enthusiasts out there. It isn't really a quote-unquote lost language. It's just one of those things you might have to go to Google and look up a list of DOS prompts so you're able to more effectively navigate DOS. And if you're just going for a Windows 98 build and never feel like going back to DOS, I will show you how to install Windows 98 in a future video if you guys want to see that, because this is DOS and Windows 98 capable. And of course, we have a lot of different games we can play, and because my humor is basically the same as a 12-year-old child, I named the volume DOS 69 so I would never forget what it was for. From here, everything is formatted. You can take the card out and go ahead and get everything ready so that you're able to play games. And you will see here, if we just pop over to a modern Windows environment, Windows 10 in this instance, I'm never switching to 11. I like DaVinci Resolve on 10, and you can't change my mind. I just created a games folder within the root of the DOS 69 folder, and I copied everything over. It doesn't matter where you put the game, so long as you remember and can use the change directory DOS prompt, you'll be able to get everything you need. And just because there isn't a CD-ROM drive set up right now, I'm going with the floppy disk versions of the game where you have the .exe versions inside of the folders. And that's what I remember from back in the day. Once you copy the games over you want on your system, or when you actually want to test them, you can just reboot the system with that micro SD card pop back in, and it'll go right to the C drive like you remember. And that is absolutely amazing. It's 2025, and I feel like my parents just went out and bought me my 46DX66 PC for Christmas. It's such a fun feeling to have modern hardware doing all of this retro stuff. And again, this is not software emulation, this is not FPGA recreation, this is a modern CPU on a die that has the compatibility for all of the different instruction sets from back in the day. So you just go ahead and run a DOS game, and it runs exactly like DOS games would, because it's running DOS on a CPU and system that would have been period accurate back in the day. And again, it isn't correct because it's 16:9, but that's just the monitor's little bit of an issue. But this is absolutely an insane project. Trying to run DOS games in DOSBox is an easy time, but of course you don't get that authentic feel. Once I pair this thing with a nice 17-inch VGA monitor, my Sony Trinitron that I have from an old PC, it's going to look absolutely spectacular, and you're just able to play this like any other game. It works exactly the same, and that means that you actually try to go set up sound for some games, you're going to be banging your head against the wall wondering how in the hell it can't actually see the sound card. It was a problem back in the day, and Rise of the Triad still argues with it hear, although the sound will be set up by the BIOS and you'll be totally fine to go. And in my opinion, no game did it better than Rise of the Triad, best DOS first-person shooter ever made. Change my mind in the comments down below. But the Itx-Llama is just an absolute blast to be able to play around with. It's having a brand new DOS Windows 98 computer that just does exactly what you think it should, because that's all it's supposed to do. And if you want to see more videos on this, leave me a comment down below. I'll definitely go over some of the 3D games in Windows 98 and even DOS later on, because I do have that TNT too, and recommend me an ITX case and the final GPU inside of the box, because I'm thinking maybe I'm going to go Voodoo 3 3000, but I'm open to suggestions. But we're done. I've died. It's hard to play games off screen, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.